Welcome back, everybody. My name is Nick, and this is Swiftful Thinking. Again, we're in the Advanced Learning playlist, so advanced developers only. You know if you are one. Before we get into the really cool property wrappers, which I promise are coming, they're in the next video, we're first going to take a quick look at KeyPaths. KeyPaths are something that I personally don't use very often in code. I don't think most Swift developers do, but they are pretty cool. So just at a high level, what is a KeyPath? If you ever use the @environment variables like the dismiss or the presentation mode in SwiftUI, when we access those, we use the \dismiss or \presentation mode. And you probably have wondered why we use that syntax versus when we create like an app storage, we have to put a hard-coded string in there. And that's because those property wrappers, the @environment, actually accepts a key path. So we're going to build up to making our own custom property wrappers that accept key paths. But we can't do that without first understanding what is a key path. So in this video, we're going to take a quick dive into key paths, where they're coming from, how they work, and then we're going to write a couple of our own functions where we can really write some sleek code with the use of key paths. Hit the like button if you're enjoying this series. Leave a comment after the video if you learned something new. And I promise you the next couple of videos are going to get epic. So even if KeyPaths is not your thing, it's worth it for the next 2 videos. Let's jump in Xcode and write some code.
And we are back. What is up, everybody? A lot of cool stuff coming in the next couple of videos. Before we get into actually creating our own custom property wrappers, I want to first briefly introduce you guys to KeyPaths, because then we're going to use that as we make some really cool property wrappers in the next couple of videos. So without further ado, let's right-click the navigator, create a new file. It'll be a SwiftUI view. Let's call this one KeyPaths Bootcamp. All right, once we're inside, let's get the preview working here. I'll make the text a little bit bigger for you guys. Cool, and this is going to be just an intro to KeyPaths. I actually don't use KeyPaths that often in my own apps. I don't think most people do, but they are a cool thing to know about. And before we even get into it, I want to show you guys an example of how we actually use KeyPaths in Swift, because some of you probably don't even realize that you're already using them for certain things. So for example, if we create an app storage property wrapper, we would initialize it something like this with a string for the value would be maybe my user count, and we'll make it a variable, call it user count of type integer, right? We'll set it equal to 0 for now. When we create these property wrappers, we have to type in our own key, a custom key. But isn't it weird how sometimes when we use like @environment and we're going to make like the dismiss, we can use the \period and we come up with like the dismiss. We'll make that a variable called dismiss. We also have like the presentation mode. Isn't it weird how sometimes we have to write out a key and sometimes we can use this syntax here? Well, this syntax is what we're talking about in this video. This is a key path. And the main difference between these two is that key paths are kind of like enums in that when we are writing the code, we need to know all of the cases when we're actually creating our code. So for example, in the environment here, when Apple ships us the SwiftUI framework, they have all of these key paths already in the framework, right? They know what the dismiss key is going to be. And the reason we don't have a key path for app storage is because this is something where the developer, like you and I, are creating these custom keys. So Apple doesn't know what this key is going to be, and that's why they can't give us a key path for it. So in this video, we're going to learn basically how we can start using some of these key paths in our code. And then in the next video, we're going to create our own custom property wrappers like @environment or @app storage. In the video after that, we're going to learn how to attach our own custom key paths to those property wrappers. And following that, we're going to dive even further into how these key paths actually work. But in this video, I just want to briefly introduce you guys to key paths. All right, so we're not actually going to use this. I will comment this out as well. All right, let's start by taking a really simple approach to key paths. What we're going to do is create our own custom data model here. I'm going to create a struct, and I will call this, let's literally just call it my data model. and we'll open the brackets. And every my data model is going to have an ID. We'll just give it a uuid.string. Every data model will have maybe a title of type string. We'll do a count of type int, and let's do a date of type date. All right, let's go and play around with one of these my data models. And before we even play around with getting it on the screen, let's just do a quick on appear. And in our little function here, let's create one. So let's say let item equals my data model. And let's give it a title of maybe 1, a count of 1, and a date of maybe now. Really cool how recent versions of Swift have added the .now to the date. I think that's really nice and readable. But anyway, let's say we wanted to access maybe the title from the item. We could say let title equals item dot title. Simple stuff, I know. But another way we could actually do it would say let title 2 equals, we can reference the item. So I'm going to use the square quotes here, kind of like we were accessing an index in an array. But instead of obviously putting some sort of index, because this is not an array, we're going to start typing here KeyPath. And it's just a fancy way of saying, instead of accessing the title directly, we can access the title through a KeyPath. So in this section, I'll put the \, and now I can access all of the KeyPaths within that object. So I can access the title here. And you'll see that the title is of type string. So doing this and doing this, believe it or not, are the exact same thing. You're probably wondering, yeah, well, why on earth would we ever want to do this? This is much more complicated than doing this. Well, most of the time we actually still want to do this. But if you're making some sort of special API, something like this up here, well, this actually becomes really convenient. So although writing out like this with the extra KeyPath is not great, what we're getting at is basically the ability to do this and then access some sort of value. So let's put it on the screen just to make sure it works. We'll do an @state private var. We'll call this screen title of type string. Set equal to a blank string for now. And then let's just set the screen title equal to title 2. And we'll put that on the screen. Screen title, let's see if it works. And 1 appears. So this is the exact same thing as this, just a different way to write it. Now I want to show you guys that we can also, in the KeyPaths, we can also reference nested properties. So for example, if we had another struct here called like movie title, right? And let's just say, for example, the movie title has a primary as well as maybe like a secondary title to it, just for example's sake. Let's make the title in our model a movie title. And now to access the primary, we can access the title dot primary. We can also access the KeyPath at dot title dot primary. So let's just get this working real quick. We'll do a movie title alpha beta. Let's see if it works. And we got alpha on the screen. So here's just a quick example how we can go into nested properties just like we were normally. All right, I'm going to undo that because we don't really need that for the rest of this video. Now we're going to do one quick example of when a KeyPath might actually be useful in our app, because this is not useful. And honestly, unless you're making your own custom APIs, it's really not that useful. Like I would never do this in code. But if I was making some sort of cool extensions or maybe property wrappers, something like this, using these makes your APIs really convenient. So we don't know how to make custom property wrappers yet, but we can create a custom extension. So let's play around with that for the rest of this video. What I'm going to do is create an array here, make an array, and let's set it equal to an array of my data model. I'm going to cut this and paste it here. And I'm just going to copy and paste, and we'll do 2, 2, let's go distant past, and we'll go 3, 3, and we'll go distant future. Cool. All right, I'm going to comment this out. We don't actually need this on the screen anymore. And what I'm going to do is create an @state private var. Let's call this data array of type an array of my data model. Let's set it equal to a blank array. We're going to set the data array, just do it down here, equal to the array. On the screen, let's put a quick little VStack, and we'll do a for each. For each item in the data array, and this will be each item. Let's make these identifiable so that we can loop on that ID. And we're just going to put a little VStack in here, maybe with the text. Let's do the item dot ID. Let's do the text of the item dot, what else do we have? The title, text item dot count maybe, and then text item dot date. I think we added a date in there. Yeah, date. And we got to make the count a string, course, date.description. Sorry, that should compile. All right. Let's get a little bit of formatting. Let's just give it a quick, maybe a font of headline. Let's make it, and let's change this top VStack to a list. How about that? Cool. And we'll add alignment in here of maybe leading. Cool. All right, so we have my 3 items on the screen here. And what we're going to do now is basically just sort these items. So I want to sort them by the count like they are right now. So let's start the array as if it's out of order. So let's do maybe 3, 1, 2. We want to sort it back to 1, 2, 3. And now we're just going to sort this array real quick. And before we get into it, just a reminder for anybody who's maybe new to Swift, arrays have 2 different sort methods. If we make the array mutable, we can call array.sort, and this sort is going to sort the array in place. It's going to mutate the existing array. But we could also call sorted, and sorted is going to sort the array and then return a new array. So we can either mutate the existing array or create a new array and return that. So just to keep it clean for now, let's just create a new array. So we're going to say let new array equal by. All right. And on this closure here, I'll press enter. And when we use the sorted function, we need to compare 2 items. I've covered sorted before, so I'm going to move a little quickly here. This will be item 1 and this will be item 2. So we're just going to compare any 2 items. So really, this function is going to compare this item versus this item, and then it's going to compare this item versus this item. And if there was more items, it would continue to compare every 2 items until all the items are sorted in order. And in here, we just want to return, let's say, if the item1.count is less than item2.count. And then let's put the new array on the screen. And we can see here that the new array is 1, 2, 3. Awesome. All right, let's take this one step further. I'm going to copy this and comment it out. And instead, let's do new array, but this time let's use the KeyPaths. We're going to say item1 accessing the KeyPath at the .count is less than item2 accessing the KeyPath at .count. Cool, and this is the exact same thing. But now let's go ahead and make this an extension of the array. All right, so now what we're going to do is create an array extension to basically do this for us in a more convenient way. So I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. I need just a little more screen space. And let's first make this first function into an array extension. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create an extension of the type array. And I'm going to do this extension where the element is equal to a myDataModel. And in here, let's create a func called maybe custom sorted. We'll just call it for now. It'll be a function that returns us an array of myDataModel. All right. And then in here, we're going to call our method. So I'll paste what we had. I'll uncomment it out. And we're inside the array already. So that will just be self. So we're going to return self.sorted. And we're going to return sorted item1.count, item2.count. Perfect. All right, so now we can come down here and we can call, we'll say, let new array equals array.custom sorted. And it works. Very cool. All right. So this works, but the problem we're going to face now is that we want to make this more generic so that we could sort basically any data model at the count KeyPath. But the problem is right now, the reason that this is working is because the compiler knows that my data model has a .count, right? But it doesn't know that every type has a .count because not every type does. So for example, if this was any other data model, even like let's do a movie title, right? Movie title doesn't have .count. So now we obviously can't use our custom sorted function. So how can we approach this? Well, let's start by, instead of referencing the myDataModel type, we'll reference the element that the array is in. So we'll just add the element here. So right now the element is myDataModel. Now this is working, but the problem we're going to have is when we go to make this more generic and we actually remove the requirement for this array to be of type myDataModel, the compiler is not going to know that whatever data type we're sorting is going to have a .count, right? Because if we use, for example, movie title doesn't have a .count, so we would never be able to do this. So if I removed this, it's not going to work. All right. So this is kind of one place where KeyPaths might come in handy. And so what I'm going to do is here, kind of like we just did before, I'm going to access the KeyPaths rather than accessing the count directly. So I'm going to delete this and I'll access the KeyPath. I want you to notice here that the KeyPath itself has a generic type, right? Right now the KeyPath is for myDataModel, and then that path is going to have a custom value. And this value is also generic. What that value is referencing is the type that is the count. So for example, if I use the KeyPath of .count, it's going to be an integer, right? But if I use the KeyPath of .title, it's going to be a string. So that's why when I'm looking at this KeyPath here, there's an extra value type. That value is going to be whatever type the path is going to turn into. So let's start by making this just a KeyPath of .count, and we'll make this one a KeyPath of .count. But again, not every element is going to have a .count, but every element will have a KeyPath. So instead of actually calling .count, let's actually just pass in a KeyPath. So I'm going to copy this type here, and I'm going to pass into my function a KeyPath of type KeyPath. And this value, of course, is generic. So we know the KeyPath of the count is an integer. So let's put in an int here, and then we'll come and take the KeyPath and add it in here as well as in here. All right, so now let's try to use our custom sorted function. We're going to come down here. Let's set our new array equal to the array.customSorted. And you'll notice now that we can access the KeyPath in our function. So instead of having to type this out, I can just reference the \dot and I can see all the types. Now I can try to use the title, but it's going to yell at me because the title is of type string and we made this coupled to being type integer. So right now I can only use the count. And that's going to work. When the preview runs, it should still work. Awesome. But of course we want to make this generic so that we can use things other than integers. So I'm going to come up here, and instead of coupling this to type integer, we'll make it of type t, a generic type t. Now the compiler is going to tell us off the bat that we can only compare two things using this less than sign if those two things are comparable. Comparable is a protocol in Swift. So here we are comparing a number versus another number. We could also compare two things like strings or doubles or any two things that are comparable. So really this T is not anything, but it's anything that conforms to comparable. So now I can come back down to my code and I can reference maybe a .date, for example, because dates are comparable. You can compare two dates. So right now we're comparing a date if one date is less than another date. So the first date should be the lowest one. So if I look, the number 2 is of distant past, which is the lowest numerical date. That's why number 2 is coming up first here. I could also now use this by .title because strings are comparable. So now we're referencing the title, which is 1, 2, 3, and that's going to be alphabetical. That's why 1 is coming up first. And that's why TW is coming up last. And this is already a little bit better, but let's just keep going. So let's finesse this a little bit before we wrap up the video. We want to make sure that this extension, we can use this on any type, not just myDataModel. So let's get rid of this. And this type of myDataModel is actually just going to be the element type that is in the array. Let's also change the name of this function so that it matches the native API. So the native API is .sorted. Let's call this sorted and we'll do by KeyPath. And then because we have the word KeyPath in the name, we don't really need to call KeyPath twice, right? So if I do sorted by KeyPath, it's going to say KeyPath and then it says KeyPath. We don't really need the second one. So let's just put in an underscore here for the external name, and this will be the internal name within the function. So we'll come back down here, sorted by KeyPath, and I'll just reference the dot count maybe. And then of course we want the ability to sort both ways. We don't always want to sort with a less than, but we also want to maybe sort by greater than. So let's add in another parameter here called ascending, make it of type Boolean, and we'll set it equal to true by default. So that normally we will ascend things from lowest to highest. So if we're sorting numbers, the default will be from 0 to 10. And then let's customize our function here. So firstly, let's say let value 1 equals, and we'll reference the item 1 at the key path. We'll say let value 2 equals, we'll do the item 2 at key path. And then let's just check whether or not we want to do ascending or not. So add an ternary operator here. We'll do ascending question mark. If we want to make this ascending, meaning checking if one value is less than the other, we will do value 1 is less than value 2. Otherwise, so if it's not ascending, meaning it's descending, we'll do value 1 is greater than value 2. All right, so now I can come down to my function. The default will be ascending, so we have 1, 2, 3, but I can also add the ascending as false, and now we're going to go 3, 2, 1. So we have this really cool sorting function here, referencing the key path. So now we can use this sorted by key path on any array, so it doesn't have to be an array of my data model, and we can use it on any property inside the array as long as it's comparable. So we can use it on integers, on strings, on dates. So now we are sorting the dates by highest to lowest. So we have the highest date here, which is the distant future, or we can reverse it back to true. And now distant past is first. Let's wrap this up just to have one more item in our toolbox here. We're going to make this a variable. And I showed you guys at the beginning, arrays have two methods. One is called sort and one is called sorted. Sorted returns us a new array, but sort mutates the array in place. So we can call array.sort, and it's the same logic. So we have the item 1, so we have the item 1, and we have the item 2. It's just sorting the array in place rather than returning a new array. So let's come up here and let's copy this. Let's paste another function, and let's just call this one sort by KeyPath. And this function needs to be mutating because it's going to mutate the array in place. It's not going to actually return another array. In here, we're going to call self.sort instead of sorted. And now we have both of these functions working. And just like that, we can now come back down here. And not only did we add an awesome sorted by KeyPath, we also added an array.sort by KeyPath. And we can go here with the .count, and let's put the array on the screen. Cool. All right, guys, that's it for this video. I wanted to introduce you guys to KeyPaths. They are really cool, but yes, they are a little tricky to use, right? Because I tried to back you guys into how we got to the KeyPaths in this video. Hopefully that helped somebody out there. But if you didn't have me walking you through this, I think this would be hard to come up with on your own. The good news is, and what I do want to actually reference you guys to, is ChatGPT is oddly really good at making these extensions for KeyPaths. So if you want to do something like this, it doesn't have to be sorted. You could use map, you could use filter, you could use kind of any function basically. I would honestly start by just asking ChatGPT, can you make an extension of array where we maybe map an item from one type to another type or something like that? ChatGPT will probably output something very similar to this. And hopefully with this video, you now be able to understand and read what is actually happening. Awesome. In the next couple of videos, we're going to create our own custom property wrappers. So like at environment and at app storage. And 2 videos from now, we're going to actually make our own property wrapper with a key path. So we can do something like this on our own custom property wrappers. which I think is really cool. This was just an introduction. Hopefully you guys are a little more comfortable at KeyPaths now. Thank you guys for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiffle Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.